Hello everyone. Today I want to show you how to make, or how that I made, a sketchbook or journal. I specifically wanted something that would lay flat. Uh, I'm going to use this for something specific, and I needed it to lay open, lay flat, and I wanted to use recycled materials. A lot of you know me and know that that is one of my biggest pet peeves, is to see paper thrown away or even sent to the recycler, because a lot of times it doesn't get recycled. This is brown craft paper that comes as packaging. You can tell it's been wrinkled up. I ironed it a little bit just to make it a little easier to work with. This is the kind that is perforated into sheets. And this is not the first time I've used this in a journal. My latest art journal, I have that same paper in. Um, the nice thing about it is it's all the same size. So I'm just tearing the perforations here, and to do the to tear the perforations, I tend to use my thumbnail and I run down the fold and then I tear it. Now, I also didn't worry terribly if I tore a little spot, simply because this was for me. It is one of those. Now that piece was cut. It was on the end, so I'm not going to use it. I'll use it for something else, for tabs or pockets or something. All of that paper I just simply folded in half. I did use my bone folder and make sure that the crease is folded really nicely. It's not quite square when it's folded. It's just a little bit taller than it is wide, and I happen to like that. Now, I made 6 signatures, each with, I think, about 6 pages each. I think one of the signatures I was short 1 sheet, and again, it was for me, so I'm not worrying about it. So now I have my signatures. Now I have to think about um, what I am going to do as far as cover. This particular book, and because it lays flat, the signatures are actually going to show, and the covers are just 2 rectangular pieces. I'm going to use sheets cut out of wallpaper books. I had some wallpaper books that were emptied, and so hubby was very sweet and he cut my covers for me. The covers are cut about 1/4 of an inch bigger than the folded sheet. So whatever paper you use, the cover needs to be just a little bit bigger. Now I'm going to use another recycled thing, and that is a brown paper bag from the grocery store. I like to get the bottom off and out of my way. I don't try to use that part. It's just folded up funny. So what I do is I take both edges off, and then I can open it up and get the bottom off. Then you find where the seam is and you open up the seam, and that'll give you a nice big chunk of paper bag. Now the inside packing craft paper was not as heavy as a paper bag. It's a little lighter weight, so the paper bag is going to work real well for the cover. And I didn't measure or anything as far as the cover goes. I just cut it a couple inches. Actually, it's about 3 inches bigger each direction. I just cut out a couple of big pieces. And whatever you do once with the covers, you want to do the second time, because you have 2 covers. And there won't be a spine because I'm going to Coptic stitch this so that it lays nice and flat. Now I'm going to take these 2 pieces. I guess I decided one was just way too big, so I'll just cut off that extra piece. What I'm going to do is paper now, and I have done this on other covers, and I love this technique for making covers. It lends itself to it being a nice sturdy cover. If you didn't have book board as heavy as what I just used or what I'm using, this really, this technique adds to it. You take the paper bag and you scrunch it up, and you open it up and you scrunch it up. The more times you do that, the more little bumps that end up in it, and the softer it gets. And really and truly doesn't matter how soft it gets, it's a matter that you want lots of peaks and valleys in it, because in a minute we're going to give it a little bit of color and shading. It's kind of hard on the hands. That paper bag was really heavy, nice and stiff. If you didn't have paper bag, if you didn't have the packing paper, you could use craft paper. You could use watercolor paper. This type of journal or sketchbook, the the whole point of this is to make it lay flat. Now what I'm using there is stays on ink. What you need is something permanent, and what I did was I just took the ink pad all by itself and started rubbing across the paper bag where I had crunched it, and you can see that what happens is it the the pad itself is hitting just the mountain peaks that are on that paper. It just gives it some color. It makes it nice and fun, and it's just a technique I enjoy. Um, you can make this look a lot like leather by using a lighter brown to hit those mountaintops. Um, but I kind of liked the green. I kind of wanted the green in it. So now I'm going to actually cover my covers. And remember, what everything you do here once, you got to do twice. So I have my cover sheet right side down so that it's away from the cardboard. I'm going to use my Mod Podge and glue mixture, which if you look in the upper right hand corner, I hope you will see a link to my collage medium video, because I use a mixture, and that video does explain how much of each I use. Now I'm just getting the Mod Podge medium right in the middle, and I'm going to flip it over a little bit. I'm not going to lay it down because I don't want to get it all mushy all over my table, and I'm just rubbing all over the surface of that real well. That paper bag kind of stretches back out when you get it wet, so that's something you want to consider. And if it had wrinkles in it, it wouldn't hurt my feelings. And now I'm just going to fold the corners in, gluing them down, making sure everything's nice and neat, but don't pull too hard because you don't want to pull a hole in your paper. And as you can tell, I'm working with the corners as best I can. Try not to touch anything. Try not to get myself all covered with glue. I just work around the cover and fold in the corners. And don't pull real hard on the corners. There again, that paper bag softens up a lot when it gets wet, and you do not want to pull a hole right at your corner. You want your corner protected. And now I just pushed it up and over. I'm going to work all the way around the cover, doing exactly the same thing. Just making sure it's folded in nice and neat, pushing it in nice and snug. To keep my arms out of the glue, I spin the page or the cover rather than trying to reach across the top. It's an amazing thing how much that paper bag will stretch back out once it starts to soften. And I go ahead and get some Mod Podge medium on the surface, but if you noticed, I stayed away from the edges. And what we're going to do is, we don't want to lay that down flat on something, because even though I didn't put glue on the outside of the front, that paper bag is absorbing moisture. So what I have done is I've grabbed some paint bottles and I am going to turn it all upside down and sit it on top of those paint bottles. Once that got dry, I want the front cover to be nice and covered with Mod Podge. So once again, I'm going to stay away from the edges and get my front cover with a layer of Mod Podge on it. It's going to protect the cover and keep it clean, that kind of thing. That the paper does not have to have Mod Podge over it, but I wanted it kept clean and neat, and it therefore gives it a nice seal. But I didn't do the edges. Again, though, I am going to prop it up on something, but I set it aside. And now I'm going to come back and I'm going to do the edges. And to do this, I just put some Mod Podge out on my craft mat and I'm working around the edges, both the front and the back, kind of feathering it in, making sure that that the edges get covered and the corners get covered, but not sending the Mod Podge all the way to the middle, because it just makes it easier to get it done and not have to wait for several steps. I will again make sure that it's elevated off of my drying surface. If you lay it down flat, it's going to pull on it and cause little bumps. Okay, once we get that all dry, we need to finish the inside of the cover. Like, that's just some green packing paper. Now, that green packing paper was sent to me in a package as packing paper, but it was originally a roll of painter's paper. I'm again using my Mod Podge glue mixture. But it's basically green craft paper, and I just thought it would look nice on the inside cover. I had used the green ink on the crafty paper, so I thought it would be nice to put the green packing paper on the inside. And I'm just Mod Podging it real good before I put it down. Now this paper was about the same weight as what I used for pages in my book. It was not perforated, however, because like I said, it was a roll of painter's paper. And I think it was only about 12 inches wide or so. I can't remember. But I just made sure it was down real well. And then I put a layer of Mod Podge collage mixture over the top of it to, again, protect the inside of the cover. There again, it wouldn't have to have the Mod Podge over the surface. It would be papery, but you do want to make sure that it's not touching anything while it's drying, because it does seep up through craft paper. And you have to do that twice, once to the front and back cover. Now we're going to get ready and we're going to mark our signatures for our binding. Now, frankly, I'm going to do a Copic stitch binding here, and I decide that I'm going to put in 9 holes. I'm going to put a set of 3, a set of 3, and a set of 3. There's lots and lots of ways to do this. I have a centering ruler. It has a 0 in the middle, and then I put little dots right in the fold. At 0 right in the center, half an inch out on each side, and then I go up and I do 3 holes half an inch apart on the top and bottom edges. Now I mark that with an ink pen. You'll see in a minute that's not my preferred way to do it. I guess I'm kind of lazy, but going through and marking them all. And I don't clip my papers. I just hold them real well, and it works for me, and that's what matters. And I did have to go back and repunch those holes a little bit. Um, I usually just get it started, and then sometimes I have to move my hand like that where I go to the other side. And I am putting pretty good size holes in there because of the Coptic stitch binding and going in and out of each hole more than once with my needle. Okay, here comes my preferred method. This is called the lazy way. I still use my centering ruler. Like I said, it's got a 0 in the middle of it, and it's marked from 1 to 6 on one side and 1 to 7 and 1 to 7 on the other side. It's like a ruler, but it starts in the middle. And rather than using my pen and making a mark and then picking up my punchy tool, I just go right at it and hit it with my punchy tool and make my holes. And now then I'll probably have to go back. Yep, I did. And make sure that my punchy tool went all the way through and has the same diameter of hole in each spot. Now you got to do that for all 6 signatures. Then we've got to get our covers marked. And I wanted my holes a half an inch in from the edge. The nice thing about this centering ruler is it does have 1/4 inch marks all the way down it. And I did mark with a pen on the cover. Now, normally I would use my Big Bite, but that wallpaper book was way, way too heavy for my Big Bite. It was not going to punch it. I tried it on the other cover, and I knew immediately it would not punch. So what I'm doing here is I'm starting a pilot hole. Anyone who's ever used a drill, you usually use a nail and do a little punch with your nail and start a pilot hole. Well, what I'm doing is I'm taking my pokey tool and I'm just putting it on the mark I made, the dot I made, and now I'm going to use my Dremel with now that happens to be a diamond reamer, and most people won't have a diamond reamer, but a drill bit in your Dremel will work just fine. I happen to use I use that diamond reamer to clean beads, so that's what was in my Dremel, and it works perfectly for this. What I did there, though, was I took a couple of old books and I hung the cover out over the old books so that it wasn't down on my table. I'm not going into the table. I'm not going into the books. The cover is actually overhanging the edge there. And I went through. Now, if you were using a drill bit, which is straight, you probably wouldn't have to do what I just did, which is flip it over because that diamond reamer is angled. And then what you got to do is you got to make sure that your hole is big enough for your needle to go through smoothly. And remember, you got to go back through it a second time in a lot of places. So you want to make sure that your needle just goes in and out of it very nicely. And I'm just checking with the back side of my needle. Okay, now you want to choose the right thread. Your stitches on this binding are going to show. Um, I had thought about using the cream colored thread, and I could have. I've got other cream colored thread, but I didn't like that particular one. It was too lightweight, and I knew that I might break it. So now I am not going to do a tutorial on Coptic stitch binding. This is not the best job of that. I will tell you that when I have done a few more Coptic stitch bindings, I will do a tutorial for y'all, but I am still learning how to do this. I will put up in the corner um, how to spell Coptic stitch, and I'm not even going to link to videos because there are bunches of them on YouTube on how to do Coptic stitch binding. Lisa's daughter Hannah taught us how to do that when we did the triangle book last year, and I've got it pretty well figured out, but I'm still learning, and I really didn't want to give you a tutorial until I have a better handle on it. Besides the fact that, quite frankly, filming and doing a tutorial with this binding, especially, is a little hard. Um, you really need to see better than what I have got you brought in, and um, it it's in and out. You know, you can't always see what I'm doing, and I mean, I'm showing you pretty well, but my suggestion is if you want this kind of binding, which it's going to take a little bit of learning, there's a little bit of learning curve with it, um, but it's one of the few bindings that I know that really allow your pages and your book to lay open real flat. And for this particular style of book, that's what I wanted. I will also tell you that it's hotter than blue blazes here right now, and that waxed linen was sticking to my fingers. It was sticking to itself. Um, the lights for streaming, for doing videos, make it even warmer in here. Um, I was so frustrated. I was thinking I really should have cut a whole lot less thread. Now, if you didn't see me measure off, I have six um, six signatures and two covers, and I measured off I eight um, links that were a little longer than each of the signatures. That, if that makes sense. So, in other words, the height of my book, I did one height of my book for each signature plus each cover, and plus a little, and it gave me plenty, and I did not have to tie my thread together. Now, you can, with this particular kind of binding, you can tie your thread together and it's not a problem, but I just didn't want to. That's one of those things, didn't want to. Um, Now, I will also tell you that this paper is not as sturdy as you might think. And a couple of times I pulled my thread too hard. Like I said, I was having a little frustration doing this project. It seemed like I was sticking to that thread, and it was tangling up, um, and then it started to get there. I started to get going with it. It's always a muscle memory thing too. But you'll see there's three stitches in each section, and there are three sections in the on the spine. The covers, getting started with your first signature and doing the cover and the last signature, those are probably the two most complicated parts. It's really not hard though, guys. My thing is that it's one of those things that um, you don't do all the time. You need to practice at it a little bit, but I really like how it goes together. I think that I will be doing more books this way because I really like how it lays. Um, Another thing that I did learn um, is that I pulled too tight. Um, I have a tendency to stitch everything very snugly. Um, Back when I sewed a lot, my stitches were tight and snug then too. So that's a something you have to get used to, is not pulling quite so hard. Now you do not tie off um, between each signature the way you do with a pamphlet stitch. You actually go from the first signature right up into the second signature. And that's what I'm going to start doing here. Now, you'll notice I was putting paper clips on there. Some people put bigger clips. I used paper clip, and the paper clip was really, for me, just a way to grab the center of the signature more quickly. I'm not sure if you'll see it, but I also figured out that if I paper clipped the back half of that signature um, to the entire previous signature, it was easier to get between the signatures that I needed to do, because you stitch in and out of your current signature, but you stitch around the thread of the previous signature in the opening of the back. So I finally get my hand in there where my fingers are between one signature and my hand is behind the other one, and it starts to go a little more smoothly. And you see, I'm pulling on my thread, and I really did pull a couple places. I actually tore my paper. Um, you do not need to pull it that tight. Snug, yes. Tight, no. As with any binding, when you go back through the whole of your signature, you want to make sure you don't pierce your binding thread. Piercing your binding thread causes all kinds of headaches. So do be careful with that. I also like the fact with this particular binding that you have an entire line of thread inside your signature. Um, your signature is not just held by a couple of threads. It's got that whole line of thread in there. So when you get to that center section of your signature, the page has a very nice look to it. Okay, so I did each of the signatures the same way, going back and forth. And then the cover and the last signature are put on at the same time. And honestly, uh, this gets a little bit. I had to think about it. I have to think about it. Um, I have to think. Okay, where's my needle supposed to go the next time? And I'm leaving all of this in here for you to see partially because I wanted you to see that it's not hard, but it takes time, and then there is a learning experience that goes with some of these bindings. Um, this has also got a lot of holes in it, and I really wanted this to hold up. And I was basically that I made this entire thing for free. I'm using a little bit of wax linen. I used some Mod Podge and glue. And then there is one thing on my cover that is actually not recycled or hadn't been used previous. It was something that it is something, and I'm going to let you see in a little while what it is. It was part of a gift to me to be used in another journal, and I had pieces of it left over. So it is from something left over. It's just that it's not recycled or being reused for another purpose. Also, this last signature, I think I was getting tired and I let my papers slip a little bit. I usually don't have trouble keeping my holes lined up, and my needle was wanting to go in places that it wasn't didn't belong. You have to go through the signature the same way you do with a pamphlet stitching. You need to go out through the signature all the way through with all the same holes. And there's a looping around with cover. There's a looping around the stitch that the cover is being held on, and then you go back and you make a chain stitch around the previous signatures stitch. So the cover, the front cover going on, or the last cover, whether it's the front or the back, it really makes a difference in. It takes a little more time, I guess what I mean. But you do a lot of stitching through um, between signatures, between the cover. You don't, a lot of these stitches are not going into your signature, they're going between your signatures. So this is what I'm talking about. See, it's there we go. Finally went through the right spot. The other thing is if you pick it up where you can actually see light between your signatures, I've opened it, I can see the light between it. It makes it much easier to get your needle where it belongs. And see, I realize that I have been pulling it way too tight, and it's making it a little alligator mouthed, and there's nothing in it yet. So Now, some of the thread should stretch a little bit, but I really did pull it too tight. And that is concerning me, and because that is concerning me, there's going to be a boo-boo happen. Somehow or another, I miss a stitch. And I didn't catch it until I was completely done and tied off, and there is no way I'm taking it apart. So just be aware that if you miss a stitch, it happens to all of us. See this, I'm struggling getting that needle through the proper hole. So, and I will tell you that most of the videos that I watched on this stitch, they tell you that you can tie it off with one knot and that's all it needs. Well, I know me, and I know that one knot is probably not going to hold. So, and then after I tie a couple of knots, I just take the end of it up there and just tuck it under there. It's just one of those things. I did switch needles because this needle was a little shorter and easier to tie knots with inside my signatures. And I am just, there we go. I'm just burying that needle. So I'm just pulling that thread around. I'm really not tying a knot in it. I'm just leaving it a little longer. See how it ended up crocodile mouthed? Oh, there I see it. I have seen, there we go. I show you my mistake. So now it's going to lay nice and flat, all whether the signatures are there or whether or not. And frankly, it has sat here for a day now, and it is a little less crocodile mouth. Okay, so this is another piece of recycled stuff. This happens to be a pillowcase. It's one of my favorites, and unfortunately, it has decided to give up the ghost. It's sad little life. It's the fabric is so thin that it actually has a hole in it now. So, well, now I've tore it up, but um, I'm trying to take one of the best corners and use the best corner. And I hate to say this, but best laid plans. I got it a little too big, and then the thing I really wanted on my front cover ended up being a little bigger than I thought, and therefore you'll see in just a few minutes. I'm going to show you the whole thing. But this pillowcase is one actually my mama made. Um, she makes a lot of pillowcases for charity, and this is some fabric I had. I love pansies. Pansies are one of my favorite flowers, and and she made these for me years and years ago, and that one was so thin that it just actually it came out of the wash with a hole in it. So now that's a piece of my paper bag, and the paper bag was um, left over from the other thing, and I just crunched it up. I'm not going to ink it. I'm not going to Mod Podge it. I'm just going to leave it as a paper bag. That's a little piece of the green craft paper. So I'm just making a little collage here. And this is the thing that is not been used already. That piece of fabric has been used off of. I used a piece of it in my on my fairy journal. Lisa sent me that, and I just absolutely love that fabric. And I really wanted this big bug on the front of my journal. So I'm getting that bug as small as I can get it. And I did save those pieces I tore off of there, just so you know, in case I want to make tabs or something in this journal. And I really liked the two little bugs, but I know that the big bug is about all that's going on there. So I lay it on there and I take off just as much as I can. I didn't glue it together or anything. I've got it all sort of collaged together and I am going to take it off to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew around it. I'm going to sew through all the layers and there we have it. Well, I decided that it is just too big. I'm not happy with it on my cover that way. So I take the pansy fabric off. Now it's got little bits of that pansy fabric, and I will know that that pansy fabric's under there, and I have enough of that pansy fabric to do something else with later. But I wanted sort of this asymmetrical kind of look on my cover, so the pansy fabric was it was just too much. And I really like how it comes out. Now I'm using double stick tape, um, partially because it's fabric and I don't want to just sop the fabric with glue, but I do know that I need glue. So with double stick tape, it's always best to do as much, what do I want to call that word? That word has gone off out of my brain. You really want to burnish that down. If you burnish it down, the paper comes off easy and it stays stuck better. So, and I decide I'm going to use my art glitter glue. And it looks like I need to fill up my bottle. Now I want enough glue to make sure it's going to stay on there, but at the same time, I don't want so much that it soak through all that fabric. And I realized I forgot one piece of tape. Oh well. And here we go. Now, if you like this video, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel. This is a very long video. I do apologize for that, but it's really hard to do a project like this if you don't have a long video. Do give it a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and I hope you will enjoy and take a look at some of my other content. I'll be showing this journal a little bit later on with things in it.